you turn on that?
Better lighting. This light here?
No, let me turn off the TV. All the lights, but
You doing it on the TV?
let's turn on the TV for light.
Information at your device. The news. Fox 5.
Good evening, everybody. Hello. You notice a different background because I'm not at home.
Where are you?
I'm in San Diego.
Oh, okay.
We're down visiting Dina, and we're gonna see my sister's gonna come down. It's just our families, but we're not at home.
Okay.
So we have
Where's the dog?
right here. Hey dog,
Okay.
come here, dog.
You got a special hotel that lets you keep a dog?
Hey dog. There's a dog.
Oh my
Dog gets to travel with us now. Hey dog. So yeah, no, a lot of dogs in this hotel too. We've
Yeah.
noticed a lot of people traveling with their dogs. So we're not alone. We're not alone in having the dog with us. But yeah, so San Diego's a little bit less prohibitive than LA, but that's not why we went here. We actually almost didn't go here. If they had made it any more restrictive,
Right.
we wouldn't have gone. But, so this is the second time. This is squeezing a toy. That's the second time. This is the second time we've come here since pandemic started, but mainly because Dina's down here and get to see her. So, but Rachel's here too, so we have the whole
Yeah.
family. The whole family's with us.
Right.
So
Where's the dog?
you came up too late.
Rabbi, we just want to see the dog.
You can hear the dog. You can hear the dog in the background. The dog's squeezing a
There he goes.
toy. So the dog is very happy to be in a new place. He was really good in the car, by the way,
Really
too.
good.
That's
He
good.
didn't. He was quiet. He was sleeping. He likes traveling. So
There's another dog. I hear another dog down
yeah,
there.
there's a lot of dogs in this hotel. There's more stuff to take. It's like taking a baby, like traveling with a baby. So hopefully everyone's getting ready for a Thanksgiving. That'll be hopefully the only time we ever have to do this, which is not have. Well, hopefully we only have one holiday under
Our
quarantine.
family postponed Thanksgiving to the summer.
Okay. I hope you guys do it. No, I hope people find ways not to miss out on too much. But yeah, there's not much we can do. And most people are, trying to figure out how to connect, how to Zoom, how to call, whatever, do conference calls. So hopefully there's only one holiday. That's what we hope, is that for all these holidays that we're celebrating like this now, that this is going to be the only time. It'll only have to happen once. So, and most importantly, that everybody stays safe and healthy and nobody else
Can you see that?
gets sick. Can I see what?
What I'm holding up?
Yes.
You see the middle name?
Moses. Yeah.
My son Brian has this poster in our hometown, not hometown, but where we lived in Aiken, South Carolina, for
Yeah.
Veterans Day,
That's awesome.
because he was a helicopter pilot in the global war on terror.
Wow.
And I asked him, how did you get the middle name Moses?
Huh?
They gave him the nickname Moses. That's not his middle name. It's Scott.
So
But,
that was his name. Yeah. So
He had a hard time figuring out navigation in the beginning. He got lost a lot. And so they named him Moses because Moses wandered around for a long time.
That's funny.
I had to share that since you brought up.
But it had nothing to do with the fact that he's Jewish.
No, not really.
Oh, okay. I thought
But,
maybe.
but it stuck.
That's very funny. That's a cute name.
It's an honor.
Well, that's also a good theme for good lead in, a segue into this week's Torah portion, which is about traveling, being on the road. Not hopefully again not getting lost, but definitely going out, because that's what Vayetze means. And he went out and he left. And of course, it's talking about Jacob's journey, but it's definitely not a journey where he doesn't know where he's going. It's not like he's going in a place where he doesn't know where to go. He knows exactly where he's going. And it was not like some of the other journeys where people, Abraham's never been to, he knows where he's supposed to go, but he's never been there. This is a journey that still is fraught with difficulties. We've read it, we've studied it in the Midrash. In the Midrash, it's actually a dangerous journey. The Midrash we read actually not too long ago tells us that Esau either chases after him or sends family members to chase after, because remember, Esau already had kids by this point, that Esau chases after Jacob and tries to kill him. And again, maybe Jacob didn't, maybe Esau didn't, but Jacob's son maybe did. And that's what the Midrash is, that Esau didn't want to have blood on his hands, but directly, but of course he would have, but that if his son kills him, but that the son decided not to kill Jacob. So sometimes the journey is made a little bit more difficult than the Torah describes it, because the Torah doesn't really say that, again, the journey was far or hard. It would have been a few days, maybe a week journey from where he was in Beersheba to Haran. So Haran is in modern day Syria. He would have been traveling, I guess, Beersheba is the southern part of Israel, but still, it's about a week, a week's journey. But we read that the journey has some interesting things that happen. And so here's how it starts. It starts that Jacob left Beersheba, where they were living, right? And where he was living with his family. And he sets out for Haran, for Syria. And he did that because his parents told him to, right? His parents told him. And so kind of like in the previous portion, I just am showing you, it says he went to Padan Aram in Syria. He went to the area. So Padan Aram is the area, the region, and Haran is the city. So now we kind of like step backwards, because the last part was Esau. The last thing is we hear that Esau listens to kind of what his parents are saying and decides to marry a non-Canaanite wife, which he had already had two. Now he marries a third wife. So it says he came upon a certain place, Jacob, on his journey, and he stops there for the night. For the sun had set, Taking one of the stones out of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. By the way, it kind of begs the question, was it a special stone that Jacob lays on in that so as Jacob takes off, and again, for those that just started, we've only read the first line. When Jacob takes off and he goes on this journey, in this place that he stops at, was there something there already? Because it says he takes a stone out of that place and put it under his head. Now, these stones are going to be important, as we're going to see, but it's an interesting question of, is it just a random stone, or is it a stone that he took from another building, another ruin maybe already that was there? But it says he had a dream. A stairway was set on the ground, and its top reached to the sky. The angels of God were going up and down on it. And the Lord was standing beside him, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father, Abraham, and the God of Isaac. The ground on which you are lying, I will assign to you and your offspring. Your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants. Remember, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. That's the vision. And the next line says, Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is present in this place, and I did not know it. So that's the way the story, or the dream, is recounted. It's not the end of the story, but that's the end of the dream. That's what Jacob says when he wakes up. So there's an interesting question. Again, first of all, this is a dream. It says it happens at night. It says that it's a vision. It's not like some other times when God has talked to Abraham, or again, even when God talks to Adam or Noah. God seems to talk to them directly. So God has already talked to people directly here. But God doesn't talk directly to Jacob in the sense that he's not awake when this happens. That's important to notice. It's also interesting, of course, that Jacob knows, though, that God has spoken to him. It's also interesting because it seems as though Jacob never really knew that God was there. Hold on a second, I'm getting some noise. Okay. I don't know. I was getting noise from somebody's computer, so I muted everybody for right now. Please jump on when you want to say something, though. So Jacob now says, surely the Lord was in this place, and I did not know it. And again, in Hebrew, God is in this makom hazeh, and I, ve'anochi lo yadati, I did not know it. So he says, I didn't know God was here. Oh, by the way, I'm going to just give me 1 second. I forgot to share this. I just realized we're not sharing this right now. But I do want to just share something from this, from what he just said. It's pretty wild, because we normally, I don't know if we would assume whether it's because we like to have this idea that our ancestor Jacob had an appreciation for God his whole life. In the rabbinic mind, our rabbis, our ancestors like to teach us that Jacob was always knowledgeable about God. When it says he's a man of the tents, it's that he's a student, he studies Torah, that he's a good guy, that he's the ultimate the model of Jewish behavior. And that he knew about God. He talked to God. He had an understanding and a conception and a relationship with God, whatever you want to say. But according to what we just read, it's very possible that Jacob, until that moment, never had a moment in his life where he really understood or even felt God's presence. Now, some people could say, well, not in this place, not in this moment, not in this specific location that he's in. I mean, he says, God was in this place and I did not know. But it's almost, it really does seem like a light went on in this moment with Jacob. And he says, oh, God's everywhere. Now, maybe he thought God was only where his parents were. Maybe he thought God was only at home, was only when he was with Isaac. I mean, or Rebecca, his mom. I mean, we don't know, other than he says these really powerful words. God was in this place and I did not know it. And it's one of the more powerful lines in the Bible when we talk about recognizing God and being in the presence of God. There's even a book called God Was in This Place and I Did Not Know It. It's written by Lawrence Kushner, who wrote a lot of Jewish mystical introductions. Not Harold Kushner, Lawrence Kushner, different Kushners. Lawrence Kushner is a specialist on kind of bringing Kabbalistic ideas and Jewish mystical ideas to the masses. He's a Reform rabbi, now in his mid-70s, who was one of the early pioneers of Jewish mysticism. And he wrote a book called God Was in This Place and I Did Not Know. So it's a really powerful line about, not a line, a phrase. He means 3 words. God was here, I didn't know it. It is almost, again, it's almost the words that people say whenever they recognize that light goes on and they say, oh, wow, I now understand. Some people call that, kind of an ecstatic or epiphany, where they have that light go on. And this seems to be Jacob's. Was it the first time? It's possible. Well, let's see what he does, because this isn't the end of the story. It's the most famous few words of the story, but it's not the whole story. And remember, people are muted right now, so I don't want you to, I want you to jump in when you say something. When you say something, you want to say something. So he says, shaken, he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven. And that's the other words that are used here. V'zeh sha'ar shamayim. Sorry, let me close that up. This is the gate of heaven. So you have this phrase here, the gates of heaven. Keep hitting the page. Okay, so this phrase, the gates of heaven, is important because, again, it's going to kind of be what the area is called. Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he put under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. And he named that site Bethel, but previously the name of the city had been Luz. So this is a origin story for the city of Bethel, Beit El. And Beit El literally means the house of El, the house of God. So Bethel, whenever you see the word Bethel, there's Bethel churches. It's not Bethlehem, which is Beit Lechem, the house of God, of bread, sorry. Beit El, the house of God, is pretty pretty powerful to say some places the house of God. Just so you know, there was actually a Jewish tradition for a long time, though it's not been held as of late, that no synagogue building or temple, which again, Jews were kind of late to come to the thing of calling their places temples, right? It was actually something that only Reformed synagogues used to do, is call their synagogues temples. But you were not supposed to actually call a synagogue Bethel. There are some now. There's Temple Bethels or Bethel Congregation. There are synagogues called Bethel, but you were not supposed to call your synagogue the house of God. You could call it Beth Israel. You could call a place Beth Jacob, the house of Jacob, Beth Israel, Beth. You could call it Beth Tefillah, the house of prayer. But you weren't supposed to call your synagogue the house of God, because there's this understanding that as much as we want our places to be the house of God, there was some kind of, it was a little presumptuous to say that your building that you made for your synagogue, for your group, was actually a place that God lived. I mean, you hope that God lived there, but to actually say it was presumptive. Jacob names this place Bethel because he has this feeling, this vision, this understanding that God is in this place. Well, folks, this city, this place where Jacob had this vision for a very long time, was one of the holiest places for the Jewish people. It was in the northern part of Israel, or kind of the boundary of the northern kingdom. And it was a pilgrimage place. People went to this pillar of Jacob and would offer sacrifices and would pray at the place where Jacob had this vision. This became a holy site that people would literally come there and pray. Before Jerusalem, this place, Bethel, was a holy city, a holy site, a pilgrimage site. And so this story explains how that place, Bethel, got to be that. Jacob took a stone from some other building, from some place, maybe from some other shrine, and rededicated it. By having it under his head when he had this vision, he took it and then made a new pillar out of it, poured oil on it, rededicated it, made it holy for him and for his descendants. And for thousands of years, Jews would come to this place and say, this is the place where our history started, if you will. This was the place where our ancestor Jacob first saw God. This story was an important foundational myth and legend for our people. When Jerusalem was established, this story, I wouldn't say they couldn't stop telling it, because it was part of the Bible, it was part of the story, but it was definitely de-emphasized, because once Jerusalem was Jerusalem, the city that David made, then there was suddenly this idea that, oh, but this is a holy city too. Why is it a holy city? Because this is where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac. This is Mount Moriah. This is the place where, maybe the Noah's Ark, came to rest at. I mean, all these legends of what happened at Mount Zion were kind of like, they were created because there was no place, there was nothing that happened in that place that people would have said, oh, Jerusalem is a holy place for our ancestors. King David and Solomon made it that way, but it was already, all these other places were already long established as holy cities. So there was definitely, and the Bible tells us this in the book of Samuel and in the book of Kings, there was a major political shift to make Jerusalem the holy city for the Jewish people. It was not a foregone conclusion or an easy sell, if you will. Bethel was the holy city for the Jewish people for a very, very long time, for hundreds of years before Jerusalem. So this is an important story that explains why Bethel was originally this holy city for us, because it was the holy city where Jacob kind of first saw God, where God first talked to Jacob. I mean, we don't have a conversation, even though this is a dream conversation. This is the first time that God speaks to Jacob. and therefore, again, kind of put our history into motion. Again, when we read about Jacob, we're reading about not the first Jew. I mean, Abraham's the first Jew, but Jacob is the ancestor for all the Jews, whereas Abraham is the ancestor for Jews, for Muslims, for other peoples. Isaac is the ancestor of the Edomites and the Jews, but all of Jacob's children were part of the same faith. They were on the same course. And so Jacob is important from almost everything that Jacob does. People saying, yeah, but that's our ancestor. Jacob is our ancestor. We're B'nai Israel. We're the children of Israel, the children of Jacob. So what did Jacob have? Jacob had a vision. And again, the vision is that the angels are going up and down on this stairway to heaven. And again, the stairway itself isn't really talked about that much. It says that Jacob sees a stairway set on the ground and its top reached to the sky, and the angels of God were going up and down it. So it says that this is a point, a holy point where heaven and earth connect. And he says, Jacob's conclusion is that this is the gateway to heaven. I mean, it's easy to understand why people would say, well, this is why Jacob made it a holy city, because this is the place where heaven and earth connect. My friends, it doesn't say that's what happens in Jerusalem. I mean, later on we say that. Later on, the rabbis would say that this is the center of the universe and that this is the holiest place where the Shekhinah abides. But this is what it says about Bethel. This is a gateway to heaven, that this is a place of connection between heaven and earth. So this is Bethel, the place of God, the house of God, and also the Sha'ar Shamayim, the gateway to heaven, the gateway to the heavens. So there's legends about why the angels were coming and going. You know, there's a midrash that these are the angels he sees going up, or the angels that were coming down going back. They had come down to visit destruction on Sodom and Gomorrah. They're finally going up, many years later. They're going back up. The new angels that are coming down are doing, other things that they're going to be needed for. Actually, in reality, when you read the story, these angels seem to be going back up and down every day. This is the place where angels descend and then go back up. All right. So now we're going to read what Jacob does, because that's what Jacob sees and that's what Jacob experiences, and that's his conclusions of what happens in this place. But now look at what Jacob does. And this is also interesting. Jacob then made a vow saying, if God remains with me, if he protects me on this journey that I'm making and gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return safe to my father's house, the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set up as a pillar, shall be God's abode. And of all that you give me, I will set aside a tithe for you. So this is Jacob's reaction too. So Jacob's reaction, I don't want to minimize it. Jacob's reaction right away was, God's in this place, and I didn't know. The light went on. Jacob makes a commitment to this place by dedicating it, pouring oil, taking the rock, making another pile of rocks. Some people say that he took a rock for each of the 12 tribes, like he prophetically knew that he was going to have 12 kids and poured oil on it. Whatever, he made a pillar. He made a new marking there. He made a dedication. But then he also makes this promise, and this is the promise that he makes to God. God, if you take care of me, I'll take care of you. And what's so interesting about this is that he specifically actually says, if I return safe to my father's house, it says, Shafti b'shalom, if I return in peace, if I return, in one piece, if I return whole back to my father's house, then you shall be my God. So what's interesting about it is he conditions it. And he doesn't just condition it, if you're with me on my journey, if you take care of me on my journey, if you provide for me on my journey, you'll be my God. He asks for full return back home. I don't consider, like, God, you'll be my God when I come back home. Now, first of all, of course, we can argue that Jacob didn't know that he's going to be gone for 20 years. For 20 years. And by the way, we don't know that, and I think it's safe to say that Jacob probably didn't wait 20 years to say to God, I'm gonna do the right thing and do a tithe and give a percent back to you, or you'll be my God, whatever that means. I'll pray to you, or try to live right by God. All those things doesn't mean that he waited 20 years, because he doesn't know. He maybe he thinks he's going to be gone for a couple of months, a week, who knows? But he makes his pledge to God conditional. And it is somewhat, I would say, maybe troubling, or a little disappointing, maybe, if you will, that our ancestor, the person that we're named after, all of us, makes his relationship with God conditional on what happens. Now, as much as it's disappointing, maybe, it's very real. There's something about this that is very, very, very familiar, because we all do this. We all make this promise to God at some point in our lives. I mean, not all of us, but almost all of us. I have. Almost everyone I know has, if they've really been honest, has made that promise that, God, if you only do this for me, I'll do something for you, whatever it was. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to admit it. You don't have to cop to it, but almost all of us have done that at some point in our lives. We've said, God, take care of me, and I'll do whatever you want, or I'll take care of you, or I'll do something good. And that's what he did. That's what he says he's going to do. And, there are readings of this that basically say that there's nothing bad in what Jacob just said. There's other readings of it that Jacob shouldn't have said this, that Jacob should not have conditioned his connection to God on his own, on the good things that happen to us, that Jacob shouldn't, and we shouldn't say things like this to God. It's at the very least, it's really familiar. And Jacob, is kind of shows us a little bit that he's unsure, that he's worried about his journey. I mean, if he wasn't worried about it, it's hard to imagine that he would have said this, that I return safely, b'shalom. He doesn't say if I return to my father's house. He says return in peace to my father's home. And it doesn't seem like his journey, which is, again, to one place where he knows he's going, and he's going to see family. It's a family on his mother's side. And as we know, of course, not ruining the story that we're about to read, it doesn't always go easy for him, but it's not like he's necessarily going into the lion's den. I mean, Laban, his uncle, is not a good guy. We know that. We're going to see that. But it doesn't seem like he's not going into battle. He doesn't necessarily, it wasn't something that you'd think that he would be that, but he is. He's definitely unsure of what's going to happen to him. which is
Maybe
why
he's worried about his brother.
maybe he's still worried about his brother out there. That's one of the reasons why the rabbis say that his brother sent people after him to chase him. So again, Esau didn't want to give it away that he's doing this, but maybe he sits around his parents so that he has an alibi, but he sends some of his buddies or some of his family after him. So yeah, maybe he was worried about literally being killed now that he's away from his family. Doesn't have that protection. But there's another weird thing that happens here, which we can make the argument. Does he indeed return home in peace? I mean, the assumption is, of course, by the time he comes back 20 years from now, he comes back a wealthy man. He has his family. He has, he'll have 12 sons, a daughter, four wives, two wives, four wives. Seems like he has a lot of property. He has a lot. Well, we know he has a lot of property, a lot of sheep and livestock, wealth. But he comes back 20 years later. Shouldn't have been away for 20 years. This shouldn't have been a 20-year ordeal. So there's this real question of again, he comes back wealthy. He comes back with what he'd want to have, but was it really, number one, should it have been 20 years? And number two, was living with Laban really peaceful? So there is also that question of whether it really went whether it went the way it should. And you can make the argument, though it's not often made, by the way, I will tell you, it has been made, not by the traditional elements, because the traditional elements kind of want to have it both ways, which is that Laban was really bad, but that Jacob still got the best of him every time, and that Jacob couldn't be defeated by Laban. But there is this possibility that maybe if Jacob hadn't said this in the first place, if Jacob hadn't conditioned his acceptance of God, his deal with God, if you will, if he hadn't made it conditional, that maybe he wouldn't have had to be there for 20 years. So it has been offered, again, not usually by the traditional sources, but it's an interesting one to think. Did Jacob, to some extent, have to spend some time learning the lesson that you can't make deals with God? I mean, which of course means that God kind of punished him for it. I don't know. It's something to think about. I don't necessarily read it that way, but it could be read that way. That Jacob here at this moment doesn't get it yet. Again, most people don't like that idea because they don't like the idea that Jacob ever does anything wrong, even when he clearly does. They don't like readings of the Torah that give Jacob, they like to somehow make him look like he's not sometimes a trickster and a deceiver and when the Torah clearly tells us that he is. Anyways, it is a somewhat of a problem. The traditional sources, I say, they kind of want it both ways. All right, so Jacob has made his deal, and the way that the Christians divided it, that's a new chapter, right? And he resumes his journey to the land of the Easterners, which again are his family, or the area that his mother's family lives. And it says Artsab B'nai Kedem. The word Kedem means the east, which Aram is north and east. I don't know why I'm pointing that direction, but whatever. Off of there. It's north of Israel and to the east. But the word Kedem also means the ancient ones. B'nai Kedem is another way of saying the old ones. Kedem, like the grape juice or the wine, the company, Kedem doesn't just mean east. It also means tradition, the way things used to be. And so there is this sense a little bit that when Jacob steps back to his family, his mom's family, he's stepping back in time. He's living back the way they used to live. the way the family used to live. And that's an interesting idea, that the way that they live, the way Rachel, his wife, has been raised, is like the way that the people, his family, Abraham's family, used to live. That living in Canaan is not the way they used to live. It's the new way. It's a different way. Interesting to think about that for a second. B'nai Kedem. So what happens when he gets there? There before his eyes was a well in the open. 3 flocks of sheep were lying there beside it, for the flocks were watered from that well. The stone on the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the stone would be rolled from the mouth of the well and the sheep watered. Then the stone will be put back in its place on the mouth of the well. So it's a well. We already read about wells during the time of his mother, Rebecca, that she meets the staff member of, I want to say usually Eliezer. It doesn't say his name is Eliezer. The tradition holds it's Eliezer, Abraham's assistant, who goes to the well to find Rebecca. Well, here again in the same area, perhaps the same exact well, is where we'll meet Rachel. But this well, it says, was blocked by a rock. It had to be rolled back, and it was a big rock. Again, this was not uncommon. It was something that people did do. They kind of locked up the water source. They didn't leave it open for people to take water. Probably again because water was a scarce resource, and if anybody could come by and take the water, then wouldn't necessarily be there for you. So keep it locked up. And if you have to roll it away, the assumption is that takes a few people to do it. Some guy who's traveling there by himself can't move it away by himself. It takes a few people to do it, which means, again, assumedly, the people who are kind of handling the well keep it locked up. That's important for the story. So Jacob said to the people at the well, it says to them, "My friends, where are you from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" And they said, "Yes, we do." He continued, "Is he well?" And they answered, "Yes, he is. And there is his daughter Rachel coming with the flock. The Hine Rachel." Here's Rachel. He says, "It is still broad daylight, too early to round up the animals, water the flock, and take them to pasture." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are rounded up. Then the stone is rolled off the mouth of the well, and we water the sheep." So we got a system here. We got a system. We wait for everybody to get here. We roll it off, and then we water the flocks, and then that's part of the day. It's what we do. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's flock, for she was a shepherdess. So it seems to imply that Laban has his daughters working. Maybe not common. And when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his uncle Laban, and the flock of his uncle Laban, Jacob went up, and he rolled a stone off the mouth of the well and watered the flock of his uncle Laban. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and broke into tears. That's an interesting meeting story. That's the ultimate meet, as they say, a meet cute story. Because according to what happens here, Jacob is so excited when he sees his cousin, who he's not assuming he's never seen her before. He is so excited that he rolls off the stone by himself. He doesn't wait for anybody else. He does the work of everybody there and literally rolls the stone off and waters the flock and kisses Rachel. Now that's pretty wild. That's, first of all, it shows he has immense strength, right? That he's very strong if he could do this. or he's very excited and he's overcome with emotion, and he has one of those moments where he can like lift the car out, get to his kids, whatever, he's got one of those moments of enhanced strength. But he's so excited that he does the work of assumedly what would have taken 3 or 4 guys to do, because he just is so excited. And it seems pretty presumptuous too that he goes up and he kisses Rachel. He can't control himself. Now, it doesn't just say he kissed her; it also says he cried. He's so overcome with emotion that he cries. This is a pretty dramatic scene in just a couple lines, that we see that Jacob is overcome with emotion, overcome with strength, and he does this very dramatic and again full of love and emotion. He makes himself known. Again, all of this seems to be a miracle. It seems to be everything happens right after, bang, 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 it happens, and everything seems to be going along really fast in a really excited way. We don't know what Rachel's expression or what her reaction was when her cousin comes up and kisses her. Again, they're kissing cousins, I guess, but they we don't hear what her reaction is, but to being kissed. But Jacob then told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. On hearing the news of his sister's son Jacob, Laban ran to greet him. He embraced him and kissed him and took him into his house. He told Laban all that had happened. Now, we don't know whether these people have ever met. It could be that they have. It could be that, he made some trips up to Haran, or maybe they came down to Canaan occasionally to see each other. But it's also possible that they've never met, that this family has never seen each other. And that when he tells his uncle everything that's happened, he's told his uncle, what's happened over the last, several decades. He maybe told told him what had happened with his brother, Esau. How his brother Esau wanted to kill him, how he tricked his brother Esau. He's retelling now a story. And it's interesting to think about what was going through Laban's mind as he's hearing this, as he's hearing about what's happening to his nephew. What is Laban's reaction? Well, it seems Laban is pretty accepting. Laban said to him, "You are truly my bone and flesh." When he stayed with him a month's time, Laban said to Jacob, "Just because you're a kinsman, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older one was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes. Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Well, I'm going to finish this part and then I'll explain it. Jacob loved Rachel, so he answered, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel." Now, there's a couple things that we need to point out here. Of course, everybody knows what happens in this story, but it's really important to see what happens in this, which is that Jacob doesn't suggest to Laban that he needs to be paid. Laban says to him, "You need to be paid." And of course, Jacob says, and he says, what do you want? And he says, "I will work for you for your daughter, Rachel." Now, what's really important here, of course, is that the terms of what's going to happen here are spelled out right away. Jacob says, I will serve you for your younger daughter, Rachel. I know you have 2 daughters, but I'm working for the younger daughter. And he says the younger daughter, so that it's very clear that he knows that Rachel's the younger daughter. And of course, this is important for the way the story plays out. We don't know anything about Leah until just now. This is where we hear about Leah. And of course, what we hear about her is that she's the older daughter. It says that she has weak eyes. We're not really sure what that means. Does that mean she couldn't see very well? Or does that mean that is that a phrase that essentially means that she wasn't as pretty as her sister? That she was not as attractive? Weak eyes, either her eyes were not, made her unattractive, or it seems as though this phrase seems to be a kind of a euphemism or another way of saying she just wasn't physically attractive. The reason why it seems that way is because it's juxtaposed with the phrase, Rachel was shapely and beautiful. And the phrase that's used for that is, it says two things. Rachel, Rachel chayta yafat ta'or ve'yifat mar'eh, which is, she was, yafat ta'or means essentially that she was good form, that she had good, they said shapely. And then mar'eh is beautiful. Another phrase for this would be, yafat mar'eh would be, she looked good or good looking. I mean, we still use that phrase. It's weird in English, and we use the same phrase. Good looking doesn't mean that she looks good, that she uses her eyes well, but that she looks good. She's pleasant to the eye. That's what mar'eh means. It means when you look at her, it looks good. She looks good. So what's interesting about that is not only that she's beautiful of form, which is why it says shapely, but also that she looked good. She was beautiful to look at. So it's interesting that there's kind of like this understanding that she actually had both. Rachel was both physically attractive or had physical elements of beauty, and she also was beautiful, which seems strange that why do you have to even differentiate that? Why is it that one has to say it like that? But it's weird because it's almost as if they're saying, well, she had all the elements of beauty, and yes, indeed, she was beautiful. Whereas Leah is, again, a rakot, which is kind of, again, is translated as weak eyes. I think we've always translated it as weak eyes because we're really not sure what the full meaning of that is. We're not really sure how exactly, but it could be, again, like wasn't pleasing to the eyes. Could be, again, maybe she had the physical elements of beautiful, but she just wasn't beautiful. All we know is that it's not a good situation for Jacob to have this situation where there's a younger sister that he wants to marry, and the older sister is not the one that he's going to choose to marry. The Torah kind of sets up why, though it's not a great answer, because it essentially means that Jacob was looking at the outer beauty of Rachel and made his decision on that. The bottom line is the Torah also says she's the first one that he saw. He fell in love with her. It is love at first sight. And all of this, again, is somewhat superficial, if you will. I mean, love at first sight is, there's a magic that happens in that moment, but I guess you can make the argument that any kind of love at first sight that's only based on seeing somebody, they don't even open up their mouth, which is what happens. This is superficial. I guess you could make that argument, and unless there's something that's that goes beyond physical appearances, that it's just some energy that people have that draw them together. But we're left with this. We do have this. There's another understanding here that the rabbis have with this, which is that Rachel and Leah are twins. Doesn't say it. I'll challenge you to find it. It doesn't say it. But they love the idea that just like Jacob had a twin, Rachel had a twin. And just like Jacob and Esau, Leah and Rachel are born just seconds apart. So when Rachel's younger, she's younger, but just by instant. And of course, that makes this story even more powerful because Rachel is not really that much younger than Leah. It's not like Leah's been sitting there an old maid for 10 years trying to get married. They're the same age. And so that makes the story to some extent more powerful because is Jacob really asking for that much to say, this is the woman I love? I know she's younger, but she's not that much younger. Now, again, it doesn't say it, but they love this idea. They also love the idea for another thing. It's not just the symmetry of them being twins. They love this idea, the rabbis, that Leah was really the intended of Esau, that Esau should have been married to Leah. That somehow, like if Leah and Esau had been married and Jacob and Rachel had been married, then all would have been well in the world. Of course, again, it begs the question, would Jacob still have wound up with 12 kids? I mean, maybe. I guess the argument there is that Leah would have had kids with Esau, Jacob would have had kids with Rachel, and Rachel would have had 12 kids. I don't know. I mean, that's a possibility. But to some extent, the rabbis find in this broken relationship that doesn't happen, this relationship of Leah and Esau, which doesn't happen, they find a kind of a mystical connection that because it doesn't happen, things don't happen right. Like everything else that happens is kind of catching up for that mistake. And that's an interesting idea that there's pieces that they don't line up right. The pieces should have been put together differently. And because they weren't, things just don't quite go right. It's an interesting idea. I wouldn't say it's like everybody, that's not a legend that is widely known. I'm not saying it's like everybody says that, but it does exist because of this weird thing that happens, which again, it's not really, this story is supposed to be a happily ever after love story, and it's not. It's not from the very beginning. It's complicated, and it's not the way things should have been. By the way, there's another midrash that when we read it not too long ago, I'll remind people that this idea of Esau, if Esau had married Leah, there's another midrash that Esau was supposed to marry Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. Now, again, marrying your niece was definitely not frowned upon. It would have been to some extent in the family and would have been an accepted marriage. Jacob hides, we'll read it. I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I don't want to forget this idea of Esau somehow being on not giving the reason the midrash exists is because there's this idea still that Esau should have somehow been brought into the family, and because he's not, bad things happen with Esau's descendants. But if Jacob hadn't hid Dinah from him, if they had been married, then Dinah later on in chapter and again, I don't want to. It's one of those kind of weird blaming the victim stories, but that Dinah would not have been raped in chapter 38 if she had been married to Esau. I'm not arguing that that's what should have happened. I'm just saying that's what happened. And the rabbis kind of found this thing with, if Esau had only been married then to Dinah, then that wouldn't have happened. And again, going back to this idea that Esau and Leah should have been married, somehow this, again, if things could have been different with Esau, maybe the history wouldn't have been as bad. And remember, Esau is the ancestor of the Edomites, but he also, according to tradition, is the ancestor of the Romans and the ancestor of the Christians, and pretty much like is our enemy. The Edomites, or Esau's descendants, are powerful and will always be there, but they're kind of, they have powers because they're Esau's descendants, and they should have been related to us more. They shouldn't have been oppositional. I'm always telling you that this is part of our story, if you will, part of our legends. So the terms, I'll serve you, Jacob says, I'll serve you 7 years for your daughter Rachel. Laban said, better that I give her to you than I should give her to an outsider. Stay with me. So it seems like the terms are there. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and he seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. Beautiful. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time is fulfilled that I may cohabit with her. Seems pretty straightforward. And Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. When evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and he cohabited with her. Laban had given his maidservant Zilpah to her daughter as maid, Leah's maid. When morning came, there was Leah. So he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? I was in your service for Rachel. Why did you deceive me? Laban said, it is not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the older. Wait until the bridal week of this one is over, and we will give you that one too, provided you serve me another 7 years. And Jacob did so. He waited out the bridal week of the one, and then he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife. Laban had given his maidservant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maid. And Jacob cohabited with Rachel also. Indeed, he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served him another 7 years. So let's talk about this section a little bit. And we could talk about this section for the rest of the time, but we won't. But we will, as we know, and for those who've read this story before or are familiar with this story before, or maybe you forgot. So he has to work another 7 years. Now, what some people forget is that he did get to marry her right away. He has to wait a week, 7 days. So 7 days, but he doesn't have to wait the other 7 years. So there's something about this that's obviously powerful in that 7 days, and it's a bridal week. It's the week that it's the 7 days after a wedding that, we have a tradition of having Sheva Brachot, 7 days, even to this day in the Orthodox world, that people celebrate a marriage for 7 days. It's the bridal week. Never ask an Orthodox couple where you're going for honeymoon right away, because they don't go to honeymoon right away. They stay with their families, and they actually sleep in separate beds. After the first night, they sleep in separate beds for the next week. It's a fact. So you don't ask couples where they're going right after where you're going. You can say where you're going on honeymoon, but don't expect them to be going on honeymoon tomorrow. They're going to be around for 7 days, which is a totally different thing in the Orthodox world as opposed to the non-Orthodox world. When you go away on honeymoon after a wedding, not in Corona times, but in normal times, you go away and you don't see your family for a week or two. In the Orthodox world, you spend the next week every night for 7 days with your family. And again, the idea behind it is, well, we're not just recreating this event. We're basically saying if a couple sleeps together the first night, then after that first sexual experience that she has, it's essentially like she just menstruated. And so you have to give a woman 7 days to be clean again after her bleeding. And so I'm not going to get into the details of whether that really happened or not, or whether what happens if it doesn't, if the woman doesn't bleed the night of her wedding, it doesn't mean that the whole wedding's off or anything like that. It was not a valid reason to end a marriage, but the tradition, the net effect of this tradition, though, is that families don't spend one night together at a wedding. They spend a whole week together, having dinner together every night for a week. The family will.
I
What?
thought it's to try to get the couple to be used to each other, because traditionally they haven't really met until right before the wedding.
So, no, that's a nice answer, but that's not the real answer. The real answer is that they're not allowed to be intimate with each other after that first night. So they can be intimate the first night, but they're not supposed to be intimate any other night. So really, in reality, it's to keep them separate for the rest of the week. Now, assumedly, it's probably because, hey, they had sex. They want to have sex again and again and again. No, they're going to have sex the first night, and that's it for a week. So it's really to keep them apart without the fact that they can see each other. They just can't sleep together. So if they're in their respective corners, if they've gone back to their respective corners to their respective families, they're not going to sleep together for that week. So yeah, it would be nice if they were, and they do get to know each other. I mean, the net effect is they get to know each other, but it also is a full week of celebration. A wedding week is not a, when somebody gets married in the Orthodox world, understand, and by the way, this is one of the problems with these weddings that are going on in New York. This isn't a one night affair. This is a one night that maybe, again, you've seen thousands of people coming out for the wedding, but it also means that every night of those Sheva Brachas, that's what we call it, 7 blessings, the Sheva Brachot. Every night for the Sheva Brachas, the family's together, which might mean another few hundred people eating together. I mean, it might also mean that there's 60 or 70 people, 50 people. I've been in Orthodox communities for Sheva Brachas, for nights of Sheva Brachas. In some cases, a whole, because the family is wealthy, or because the family, it's a very close-knit community, that everybody in the community gets together every night. I mean, talking about in Israel, where everybody in the little town gets together for Sheva Brachas every night for a week. It goes on for a week. And it's basically not a one-night celebration. It's a week-long celebration of feasting. And every night during the Birkat Hamazon, every night during those 7 days, the families come together, including the first night, but then again, every other night for the week, they come together, and during the Birkat Hamazon, we do the Sheva Brachot again. We do the 7 blessings. That's why they're called 7 blessings. At the wedding, we don't call it a wedding festival. We call it Sheva Brachas, because every night during the Birkat Hamazon, we raise a cup, we actually raise 2 cups, and we do the Sheva Brachot, and we do this blessing over the couple every night during the Birkat Hamazon. We reenact the chuppah blessings, the marriage canopy blessings for the couple. So it's a very festive thing to do, but it's a reenactment to some extent and a recreation of these 7 days that Jacob has. But there's a weird thing that happened for Jacob, which is essentially he had 2 Sheva Brachas, 2 weeks back to back, which is really sad for Leah, because what it says is that the honeymoon for Leah lasted 1 week. Leah gets 1 week. Her father basically says here, Laban says, Jacob, give her 7 days where she's your wife. That's all I'm asking. Give her 7 days. Now, again, we normally say Laban is a creep, is a thief, is a horrible person. But what Laban did here, and again, I'm not making an argument that Laban is our hero, but he did something very powerful. He has a daughter who otherwise is going to be childless and without a husband and without love her whole life. And he figures out a way to make sure that she's not alone. Now, I'm not arguing that this is a good thing to do. I'm not saying try this at home. I'm not. But I will tell you, given the circumstances that we have in the ancient world and the realities of the ancient world, Leah might never have been married otherwise. Now, forget the fact that every single person in the world who's a Levite, every single person who's a Cohen in the world who traces his ancestry or her ancestry back to Levi, who's the third child of Leah and Jacob. The third child of Leah is Levi. Every person who's a Levite wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Laban and this trick. It's a fact. So we can say, well, it shouldn't have happened. It's terrible. It's a trick. The Jewish people wouldn't be here and wouldn't be the people that they are if Laban hadn't done this. So again, I'm not arguing that he is a hero. I'm not arguing that this is the way it should have been. But the reality is that we wouldn't be here the way we are. Moses wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for what Laban did. Now, it's tragic because it says right here that he loved Rachel, Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. He didn't want to be married to Leah. He never said, hey, I'll marry both. He never said that. The father says you'll be married to both. Now, of course, in that story too, which some people forget, Bilhah and Zilpah are given not as wives to him, but are set up. We see the setup here, which is that, of course, Bilhah and Zilpah will be the mothers of 4 of the tribes. So each of them have 2. Okay, and that's why we hear that right away, is that Zilpah is Leah's maid and Bilhah is Rachel's maid. By the way, there's another Midrash, a legend that we read just recently, that they're twin sisters. And not only are they twin sisters, but they are Laban's daughters as well through concubines themselves. And the reason that they're not as important, as legitimate as Leah and Rachel is because they're children, they're daughters of concubines, but they're still Laban's kids, which of course, for our ancestors who wrote this, the rabbis, they're also telling us that these are from the family, because Laban is from the family, right? His family is Abraham. He's Abraham's nephew. So these are Abraham's people. These are our people. These are from the same tribe, if you will. So this is a disturbing story in many ways. It's also it's not the princess, it's not Cinderella. It's not a Disney story. It's a troubling story on many levels, not least of which is we're told right away that we have a rivalry of love that is not good. Not good. Did it have to happen? All I know is our ancestors told this story to explain how the 12 tribes existed. This is the birth origin story of our family. And it's not a happily ever after story, but it is a story of making the best out of a tough situation. Never, ever, ever do the rabbis permit, tolerate, encourage. On the contrary, they prohibit a man from marrying sisters. It is not allowed. This is a prohibited marriage by the Torah and by rabbinic teaching. You're not supposed to marry sisters, period. It's not considered helpful, beneficial. It is not allowed. So this is a prohibited marriage. And the reason that is very obvious is that even if everybody agreed to it, it does not set up a good relationship for the family. It is impossible for a man, for a husband to love 2 women the same way. And it would be impossible for one not to feel favored. And in this case, there's no question who was favored. And so 14 years, Jacob ends up working off this debt for these 2 women, which is also part of the story too. He's held away, he's kept away from his family, from his parents for 14 years in order to be married to these 2 women. He didn't have a choice. He agreed to it and he's stuck. Now there's a lot of midrash and we're not going to get into it. We actually read it a few months ago on our Tuesday class about what it was like that night of that marriage, that first marriage at least, where Jacob, according to some legends, knew that his father-in-law was going to trick him, told Rachel, if this is what we have to do, if we have to figure out how to get your dad not to try to pull this kind of trick, let's have a code word. Let's give code words. And we'll have a word, and you tell, and only you know this word. And of course, according to the Midrash, Rachel begrudgingly gives it up to Leah and tells her the word so that she would know. There's even a Midrash that goes further, which is that Rachel is actually underneath the bed that Leah and Jacob are sleeping on that night, and she's speaking so that Jacob will hear Rachel's voice and be fooled into thinking that he's sleeping with Rachel. That Rachel went along with this on a level that was very disturbing, but again, implies that Rachel did this because she felt bad for her sister. She felt threatened by her father. All of them lead us to this other issue, which is that the Midrash the kicker of this story is that when Jacob confronts Rachel after saying, you knew that he was going to trick me, we talked about this ahead of time, and yet you still did it. You know what Rachel's response is? You tricked your father. You're coming to me and telling me that I shouldn't have tricked you. You're the trickster. And so what can Jacob say? And of course, Jacob will be tricked horribly later on by his own sons. But again, this circle of deception, of lying, is one that we are left with the Jacob cycle. That there's these horrible stories of what it must have felt like to be. I mean, this is not you can't minimize this. This is a horrible trick. It's a conspiracy that affects your heart. And Jacob is, what can Jacob say? What can Jacob say to that? So, any questions, comments, points that people want to raise? Because here's, again, the consequence of this. The Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren. Now we get into what we call the arms race, baby race. But think about that line for a second, that because God saw that Leah was unloved, she's going to be the one that gives birth first. I mean, literally, that's what it says. The Lord saw this. God saw that Leah wasn't loved, and so let her have kids first. It's what it says. Vayiftach et rachama. He opened up her womb, which means that God essentially decides when someone's going to have a child. And on top of that, God makes the decision to have Leah be the progenitor of the majority of tribes to some extent because of Jacob's not caring for her. He's going to say, okay, you're not going to care for her. I'm going to give you a reason to care for her. And I'm going to make her the mother of 8 of the 12 tribes. Boom, like that. Not 8, 6, sorry. Well, if you include Zilpah in that too, but she's responsible for half of the tribes, or again, possibly 2/3 of the tribes if you include the, or not 2/3, yeah, three quarters if you include the 2/3 if you include the concubine children, which she was essentially responsible for too. That's pretty wild. And here we get the names and the children as they come out. And as you see, as each child comes out, they're named, and their name means something. Leah, and by the way, again, this issue of barrenness, Sarah and Rebecca are barren, it says. And so Rachel is now taking her place amongst the barren mothers. Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuven. For she declared, it means the Lord has seen my affliction. It also means now my husband will love me. Now, it's weird because the first one definitely seems to be based on the word ra'ah, that God has seen me and given me a child. The other one there seems a little bit pushed, but maybe again, the Lord seen my reflection, my affliction, and therefore God, now that God has given me a child, my husband will love me. That's the first child. Reuven is the first of the 12, or 13 if you include Dinah. She conceived again and bore a son and declared, this is because the Lord heard that I was unloved and has also given me this one also. So she named him Shimon, which again comes from the word Shema, Ki Shema Adonai. God heard me. Now again, it's not just that God heard me. God heard me would mean, God heard, that's enough. But it says God heard me that I was unloved, heard that I was unloved, right? And again, this idea that she's unloved, snua, that I'm not the loved one. I mean, if there's ever a question of did she feel unloved? She said it twice now. It's not a question of, is it that Jacob loved Rachel? Okay, maybe, but the consequence and whatever happened, however Jacob conveyed it, she feels unloved. There's no question. And after the first child, she still feels unloved. So whatever happened when Jacob held up that first child, Reuben, whatever happened after that, it didn't make Leah feel loved. Again, she conceived and bore a son and declared, this time my husband will become attached to me. Yilaveh ishi. My husband. And that Yilaveh comes from the word, it sounds like, again, you can hear the word Levi. God will, that my husband will become attached to me. I've borne him 3 sons. Therefore, his name was Levi, from that word again, Yilaveh. So now the third time is going to be the charm, right? Now she doesn't say, I'm unloved in this, but she's still very clearly saying, he still doesn't feel this to me. 3 sons. She conceived again and bore a son and declared, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore, she named him Yehudah. And then she stopped bearing. So she has 4 sons. And this is interesting when you think about what really happens here. Because as much as this story is about Jacob having kids, this story, or at least the last part of chapter 29, is also a story of Leah finally kind of coming to terms with who she is and where her place is in the world. And maybe at the 4th son, the 4th child, she says, you know what? I'm going to be grateful this time. I'm going to be thankful. And this is the word that we use for thankfulness, which is perfect for Thanksgiving. Hoda'ah. Hodah, to be thankful. And that is what the word thankful, the root for the word thankfulness. It says, Odeh et Adonai. I will praise God and I will name him Yehuda. So she finally praises God. It's interesting because it's kind of like, this isn't about Jacob anymore. Yeah. The first time it kind of dawned on me what happened just now is, I don't know, maybe I had to have kids. I'm pretty sure I had kids before I ever realized this, was that by the time she has Judah, why Judah is kind of like, maybe this is why Judah is the child that kind of, we're all descended from Judah. He's the ancestor of the Jewish people. This is finally the point where Leah doesn't have kids out of anger, jealousy, out of her own feelings of inadequacy. She finally has a child and is grateful for just having a kid and realizes, again, I'm going to praise God. This is a miracle. So there's a little lesson in this too, which is that, all the other kids were blessings, obviously. They were all miracles. But when she finally realizes it, she's changed. And we've changed because we're the children, we're the descendants of gratitude. We're the descendants of a child that this woman finally saw, you know what? I can just be thankful. I can just be grateful. Whatever happened to get me to this place, whatever stuff I had to deal with in order to get to this place, I'm married to a man who doesn't love me. That's a horrible thing to have to come to terms with. No one should ever have to come to terms with that. But it seems like maybe she came to terms with that now. Now, by the way, it doesn't mean that her life is perfect at this point, and it doesn't mean that she doesn't stop loving him or trying to get him to love her. Maybe that's the better way of saying it. Not that she wants to love him. By the way, we don't even know how she feels about him. We just know that she doesn't like being the one that's not loved, which, by the way, is a little different than loving him with unrequited love. We don't know that she ever actually loves Jacob, by the way. I just want to put that out there. I don't want to throw it back on her. She definitely doesn't like the fact that she's not loved, but does she ever love Jacob? Nobody ever asked. We don't know. We don't know that she doesn't say she wanted to marry Jacob. We assume that she just wanted to be married, but it's not a good situation. I'm not arguing that this is a good situation, but maybe her coming to terms with her situation allowed her to finally be thankful for having kids. And maybe also by this point, she sees what's going on with her sister, and she realizes that as much as she doesn't find love from her husband, she's got a whole lot of miracles happening in her own life, which is that she's now surrounded by 4 kids. And I'm not saying everybody has to have 4 kids, but when you have 4 kids, you've been blessed. And she finally feels that. She says, I'm going to praise God, which is interesting because, again, this is where the break was put in by the Christian scholars who broke up the Bible. Now, of course, the story continues, but what about Rachel? What does Rachel have to say about all this? When Rachel saw that she had borne Jacob no children, she became envious of her sister. And Rachel said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. Wow. That's a pretty, Diane says, I have 4 sons and feel blessed. You absolutely do. I didn't say it just for you, but you're definitely one of the people I was thinking of who's been blessed with 4 kids. But not that I didn't say you have to have 4 kids, but it's pretty cool. And now Rachel, we see what she's got to say. It's a pretty rough line to lay on your husband. And it says that Jacob got mad, was incensed, vayachar af Yaakov, that Jacob was not happy with this. And he said, can I take the place of God who has denied you fruit of the womb? Not fruit of the loom, but fruit of the womb. I want to point that out. But it says pre-vaten. The word beten or baten means the womb. Another word for womb. Rachama is a nicer one because it means mercy. It also means mercy or that type of love. But Baten is also seems to be a little bit more of the physical space rather than the I would say it's more like if you're going to say I don't know, we don't really have a good English word for womb other than womb. It sounds better than uterus. But when he says to her, can I take the place of God who has denied you fruit of the womb? Privaten is almost like saying, I can't put a bun in the oven. I mean, it's really not like, I'm merciful, the sense of mercy. Doesn't use the word that. Saying privaten is literally saying putting things, putting the fruit up in the, getting fruit out of a tree or, having something pop out. Let's just say bun in the oven. It's not a nice phrase. And he's not happy. It says right here, I'm not happy. Jacob was not happy. It's not up to me. So she says, here's my maid Bilhah, consort with her, that she may bear on my knees, and that through her I too may have children. Well, we've heard this before, right? We saw Hagar. We saw Hagar do this. Interestingly, by the way, Rebecca, when she couldn't have kids, never says that she pulled this off. This is the Handmaid's Tale. That's where we get Handmaid's Tale from, folks, is from this relationship that a maid would have. This Amah, the maid would have a child, and it would be her child. So the child would be essentially adopted by her, raised by her responsibility, her heir. So he says to her, you go lie with Bilhah, and she'll have kids. So she gave him her maid Bilhah as a concubine, which, by the way, seems to imply that he didn't sleep with her before. Didn't come along with the package. Even though we hear about Bilhah right away, you saw that. That's why I pointed it out. You read it. He gets Bilhah as part of or she comes along. Actually, he gets her. She's part of the family, if you will. She's part of the responsibility right away. So it's another mouth for him to feed. Now, he has a relationship with her as concubine, as a shivcha. That's the Hebrew word, the shivchata. She's now his shivcha, and he is essentially Isha, that he's going to be she's like a wife. And so he came onto her. That's the phrase. He cohabited with her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God has vindicated me. He has heeded my plea and given me a son. Therefore, she named him Dan. Which again, the name Dan comes from right here. Danani. God has heeded my plea. God has listened to my deen, has listened to my judgment. And that's what the word deen means. Dayan in Hebrew is the word for a judge, like a shofet, but in also a Hebrew name, right? Dayan and shofet are both Hebrew names. It means a judge. God has judged me and has judged me, for me. God has come on my side. God has found me not innocent, but God has found me to be the right power, the party that needs to be vindicated, which is again why they translate it as vindicated. God has vindicated me, like in court. And so that's the first child that Rachel is responsible for, but it's Bilhah's son. Rachel's maid conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, a fateful contest I waged with my sister, and yes, I have prevailed. So she named him Naphtali, which again comes from the word Naphtuli. Naphtuli, a fateful contest. And again, the word Niftalti, that I've won. you can see that for Rachel, this is not a game. I mean, the words that she uses here are actually words that are used for a game. I waged a fateful contest. That to her, this was a struggle, that this was a war, if you will. And that's what we say, it's a baby race, because she does say, I need to have kids and I'm going to have them one way or the other. And now I've had them with Bill. Bill has had them for me. I now have 2 kids. So Leah doesn't take this sitting down. Now it becomes a real war, because whether Rachel now sees this as a war, that's one thing. Does Leah see it as a war? Oh, absolutely, because it says right here, when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a
This happened last time. What's going on?
I know, I thought it was my computer at first. And I'm like, oh, what's going on?
Yeah, last week, the same thing.
I know. And you know what's odd? I keep looking at my Wi-Fi about the same time every night. My Wi-Fi goes out for a brief moment, comes back up. So that's why I thought it was me, but I'm still up. So
Oh, no.
We're all here. The rabbi's gone.
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe,
Come on back, Rabbi.
maybe it was his, oh, Harvey's going to call him, right?
Joyce, you got Joyce, take it off of mute.
You're on mute, Joyce. Well,
Joyce, you're on mute.
Go down to the bottom left.
I'm calling him now. Maybe.
Joyce, you're on mute.
Rabbi?
it's okay. We get off early. Oh, wait a minute. Here he goes. He's
I
coming.
keep back. Yeah.
No, you're muted. You're muted.
Rabbi, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm now not muted. I came back on my phone. Yeah, my computer died. I think people probably figured out what happened just now, but it'll start up in a second. I'm back on to the my phone, but my computer, I was not paying attention to the fact that my computer wasn't plugged in. Normally,
Yeah.
by the way, I'm always on the same computer. I'm always on this laptop is a computer that I use all the time now because it has a camera and so I'm always on the same computer. It'll start up in a second, but I'm back on the, hold it a second. Yeah, there we go. But I'm not, give me 1 second. The computer will come on in a second. So yeah, I have it plugged in all the time. And now that I'm not, that I use all the time, the camera, and it wasn't. So 1 second. Give me 1 second. I'm back on. I'm back on the, hold it a second. There we go. Hold it a second. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Computer will come on. So, and by the way, sometimes we've had technical glitches that have been preventable, unpreventable, or not on my. This was 100% in my control, and I didn't notice that the computer wasn't plugged in. So this was 100% preventable with having the computer. And it's not like I don't have a plug; I just didn't have it plugged in. So give me 1 second, and I'll have the text back up in 1 second here. Just getting to the good part of getting the rest of these kids born. Because that's what this port my control and is essentially about. So this was 100% having the computer. Those who weren't here right at the beginning, I am in San Diego right now. We're visiting with my daughters, and we're not spending it 50 or 60 people like we normally would have. It's just going to be 13 of us So
13.
hopefully
That's a big group.
have everybody back on with the text in 1 second.
weren't here right at the beginning.
Is anybody else, by the way, I hear myself in the background. Is anybody else away for Thanksgiving, by the way? Am I the only idiot who didn't stay at home, who didn't do what they were supposed to do? Anybody else?
Brian and
Anybody-
his family went to Arizona, but I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm staying home.
Yeah.
We're not making a call to Newsom. You're okay, Rabbi.
What was that?
We're not making a call to Newsom. You're gonna be okay.
I just want to make sure. I don't want to encourage anybody. I don't want anybody to report me to the
Brian and
authorities.
his family went to Arizona.
No,
I'm here.
not you, Rabbi, never.
Okay.
We're not making a call to Newsom. You're okay, Rabbi.
What was that?
We're not making a call to Newsom.
Hold on 1 second. I just want to make sure. All right.
Went to Arizona.
No,
I'm here.
not you, Rabbi, never.
Okay.
We're not making a call to Newsom. You're okay, Rabbi.
What was that?
We're not making a call to Newsom.
Hold on 1 second. I'm still getting loops from people. Hold it. Okay. So. All right.
No, not you, Rabbi, never.
I'm still hearing the loop. So
Newsom.
I'm just going to mute everybody for a quick sec because I'm getting the loop. And I think I'm still yeah. I need to get rid of myself on the other line. There it is. It's off. All right. So apologies for that. And we'll be back on with the text right now. So that will not happen again. Well, I can't guarantee it, but at least if it happens, it's not going to be my fault. That was my fault 100% for not keeping this thing plugged in. All right. So let's get back to this, to this, because the crazy thing here is that, of course, Zilpah now starts having kids. And so this is now the fourth wife, the third time, the fourth woman that he gets to sleep with, if you will, but now the third one he's going to have kids with. And Leah now, again, like Rachel would with Bilhah, Zilpah now has a kid, and his name is Gad, or God, really. I mean, it's pronounced God in Hebrew. It doesn't mean God. It doesn't mean like God that we worship. His name is God, which means fortune or good luck. And so God was an example of this. Leah says, "What luck. I have another child." So my fifth child, this one with not coming out directly out of my womb, but definitely a child that I'm responsible for. And what's so cool about this is that, so her fifth son is not her son it's a surrogate son. We're going to say it's a surrogate son. Recognize here that, again, this is the third son that Jacob has had that's not been with Rachel or Leah, or right now, only Leah. And it's the mothers who named the kids. This is not her son. It's a surrogate son. It's a surrogate son. Recognize here. I'm getting myself again. So, the mothers, Leah and Rachel, get to name these kids. And it's the mothers. Still hearing it. Hold on a second. This is hearing it. I'm hearing it through Facebook. Sorry. I'm hearing it through somebody else's. I got to just give me 1 second. I got the mothers, Leah and Rachel, get to name these kids. Yeah, I'm definitely hearing myself from before. So somebody's playing this through Facebook on their thing. So, I'm hearing it through somebody else. I gotta just give me 1 second.
So the mother, Leah and Rachel get to name these kids.
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing myself from before. So somebody's playing this through Facebook on there.
I think Joyce is not muted.
Okay. I'm trying to. I'm hearing it through somebody else. I gotta just give me 1 second. Okay. Well, let's see if it happens again. All right. So Zilpah's maid bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, "What fortune? Asher. Women will deem me fortunate." So she named him Asher, right? The name Asher means fortune or blessed, or again, good things happening, Ashereh. That is where the name Asher, very common Hebrew name for a long time was Asher. Not so common anymore, but many of our ancestors had names. Asher was a very common Hebrew name. So those are the first now 8 sons that are born. 4 to Leah, 2 to Bilhah, and 2 to Zilpah. So that's 8 sons. Now, it's not over, of course, because we got to get to 12. Once at the time of the wheat harvest, Reuben came upon some mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Was it not enough for you to take away my husband, that you will also take away my son's mandrakes?" Rachel replied, "I promise he shall lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." Now, these are called dudaim or dudai. Here it says dudai, but these are dudaim are mandrakes. What's going on here with this crazy story of mandrakes? Well, in the ancient world, and actually up until not too long ago, mandrakes are considered a magical root. In some cases, very hard to get, very hard to collect, actually could kill you if you try to collect them on your own. There were crazy rituals that people tried to use in order to get these mandrakes out of the ground. So it's a root. It's a great scene. We showed it actually not too long ago from Harry Potter, of the mandrakes that are used in some of their witchcraft or whatever, or sorcery in Harry Potter. But mandrakes were considered to be very strange things, somewhat, again, maybe like almost human, but they seem to have had the power to make somebody fertile. Or again, that was the assumption that they could have that power to give fertility to someone. So here Rachel sees that Reuben has mandrakes and says, "Give me those mandrakes." Again, assumedly because these will help her get to have a child. And Leah's answer to him is it not enough that you have my husband? You're also going to take the mandrakes. So you can see that Leah definitely doesn't, Leah's definitely not at peace here still, because she still knows that she's not loved by her husband. And more importantly, it doesn't seem like she's sleeping with her husband. It seems as though he's still sleeping with Rachel, and only Rachel, or it seems like that seems to be what's happening here. Because what happens is that they make a deal. Reuben is the one who finds the mandrakes, but Leah takes them because that's her son, and she negotiates. And so interestingly here, Reuben is the helper in this story. He's going to come back into the story later on. Also another scene with Bilhah. But interestingly, what happens? Leah gets to have another chance to sleep with Jacob. And maybe she wouldn't have had a chance to sleep with him if it hadn't been for these mandrakes. So the mandrakes, assumedly, are going to be part of Rachel being fertile, but they wind up that Leah gets to be fertile from it, which is not the way you'd think it was going to play out. When Jacob came home from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You are to sleep with me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." And he lay with her that night. So there seems to be this understanding that Jacob is basically told what he's going to do. He's going to sleep with her. Well, God heeded Leah, and she conceived and bore him a fifth son. Now, interestingly, here it says it's her fifth son. Now, we think, and she thinks, that this is in reality her seventh son. But the Torah says this is the seventh son that emerged from her womb. So the Torah doesn't say it's her seventh son. It says it's her fifth son. And Leah said, "God has given me my reward for having given my maid to my husband." So she named him Issachar. Now, Issachar, we don't learn much about him in the Torah, but assuming he's a good guy. What's so interesting about Issachar is that when he's born, Leah says that he's a reward, and that is where the word Issachar comes from. Sachari, he's my reward. And it's not the reward now she's saying for the giving the mandrakes or for something else, other than because I gave a maid to my husband to have children with, because I gave him Zilpah to have kids with, I've now been rewarded. So it's almost as if she's saying, those kids that I had through Zilpah, I got rewarded by now having another kid. She then has another son with him. And now it doesn't say how she got to have another night with him. Assumedly, either Jacob was really happy that his wife Leah is still having kids. Then they have another night together, because Leah says now, after she has her sixth child herself, or her eighth child, if you include the two she has through Zilpah, God has given me a choice gift. This time will my husband exalt me, for I have borne him 6 sons. So he named him Zebulun, which comes from the word Zeved. That God has given me a gift, a Zeved, a good gift, a choice gift. Now, not a son. Last, she bore him a daughter and named her Dinah. Now, we don't hear why she names her daughter Dinah. It's very similar to the name Dan. It means judgment. But this is the last child that she's going to have, either through her womb, through a Zilpah. Nope. This is the last child. Her last child, her 7th child, 6 boys and now a daughter. And she names him Dinah. And that's it. Now, what's so interesting about this is that, of course, we're going to learn a bit about Dinah. Her life isn't necessarily easy life, but there's something about her role here which is very interesting that Torah kind of like leaves us with, which is that this kind of closes up shop for Leah. Leah's done. But there's an interesting teaching here, which is that Dinah provided an interesting relationship bridge between her mother and her aunt/stepmother, co-mother, sister mother, whatever you want to say. That Dinah was very close to her aunt Rachel. Why? Because look at the next line. Now God remembered Rachel. God heeded her and opened her womb. So something happened right after Dinah is born, which is that now Rachel can have kids. So whether Dinah did something by being in the world that allowed now Rachel to finally have children of her own, or Rachel was, something changed in Rachel after seeing her niece. I don't know, but something interesting happens, and the rabbis noted that. And also the writer of The Red Tent, Anita Diamant, when she wrote her book, The Red Tent, she also talked about the role that Dinah had and the kind of the recognition that something happens special here, which is that Dinah kind of brings the women back together. These sisters bond to some extent in her writing over Dinah. Rachel and Leah have this joint love for Dinah. Why? I mean, it's based on this juxtaposition of now God remembered Rachel. But did Rachel see something in Dinah that allowed her not to be jealous? Did Leah see in Dinah her sister Rachel? I mean, something happens here which is almost magical, which is that something happens that now Rachel can finally have a child. And this idea that Dinah was that bridge is an interesting idea. It's one that's kind of hopeful, if you will. Look what happens here, because we're going to wrap up in a second. God remembered Rachel. God heeded her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my disgrace. And she named him Joseph, which is to say, may the Lord add another son for me. Now, what's interesting about that, of course, is that Joseph is her first son. But when she asks Joseph, she says, maybe I'll have another. She doesn't say, it's great, I finally have a son. She says, oh, maybe God will give me another son? Is there another son in there? Maybe I'm now going to have kids. It's not, oh, now I have a kid, I can die. It's maybe I have more. That's what his name means. Yosef means an additional child. Now, of course, it's an additional child for Joseph, but she's the one who names him. Jacob doesn't name any of his kids. The mothers name all the kids. And so she named him, maybe I'll have another son, which is interesting because it's not really Joseph by himself, right? It's not Joseph. And of course, she does have that other child. It's Benjamin. But Benjamin kills her. I mean, literally, she dies giving birth to Benjamin, which also kind of begs the question, maybe if she had just been happy with Joseph. But of course, Joseph, we know, will be a very special son. When Rachel had born Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, let me go back to my own homeland. So something happened also with Joseph now. And the rabbis say it's because Joseph was so special that Jacob finally remembers, you know what, I'm not supposed to be here. I can now leave because this kid is the signal. And that's what we read in the Midrash, that when Joseph comes out, Jacob goes, now I got to go. I have to go back home. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go well, and that I may go. For well, you know what services I have rendered you. You know what I've done for you. But Laban said to him, if you indulge me, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me on your account. So by the way, he says, I have learned it through divination. It doesn't say I learned it from God talking to me, but I learned it from, I've learned it, through magic. And he continued, name the wages due for me and I will pay you. But he said, you know well I have served you and how your livestock has fared with me. You know what you already got for me being here. For the little you had before I came has grown much, since the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. And now, when shall I make provision for my own household? So I've enriched you. What about me? He said, what shall I pay you? And Jacob said, pay me nothing. If you will do this one thing, I will again pasture and keep your flocks. Let me pass through your whole flock today, removing every speckled and spotted animal, every dark colored sheep and every spotted and speckled goat. those shall be my wages. Which assumedly, again, are not the high quality goats, not the high quality goats and sheep. So it's kind of like saying, you can give me the things that are harder to sell, the harder sheep and goats to sell. Those will be my wages. In the future, when you go over my wages, let my honesty toward you testify me. For if there are among my goats that are not speckled or spotted, any sheep that are not dark colored, they got there by theft. And Laban said, very well, let it be as you say. But that same day, he removed the streaked and spotted he-goats and all the speckled and spotted she-goats, every one that had white on it, and all the dark-colored sheep, and left them in charge of his sons. So what does Laban do? He takes out all the speckled sheep and says, I'm going to trick him. I'm going to take them all away, and then he won't have them. Well, of course, Laban is an idiot, and he knows nothing about genetics. He knows nothing about the fact that there's recessive genes, which he should have known because he's older than Jacob, and he's been a herdsman longer than he has. And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob was pasturing the rest of Laban's flock. Jacob then took fresh shoots of poplar and of almond and plane, and peeled white stripes in them, laying bare the white of the shoots. The rods that he peeled, he set up in front of the goats in the troughs and the water receptacles that the goats came to drink from. Their mating occurred when they came to drink. Okay, well, it's all basic information. This whole thing about the creating these things in the water, people have speculated, why did he do that? Is it magic? Is it something he did to make them have more sex? I mean, what is it that he's doing here? People don't really know. Some people have speculated he makes it kind of magical when it's not magical. I mean, it seems like it's magical, but it's not. It's basic genetics. And since the goats mated by the rods, the goats brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted young. But Jacob dealt separately with the sheep. He made these animals face the streaked or wholly dark colored animals in Laban's flock. And so he produced special flocks for himself, which he did not put with Laban's flocks. Moreover, when the sturdier animals were mating, Jacob would place the rods in the troughs in full view of the animals so that they mated by the rods. But with feebler animals, he would not place them there. Thus the feeble ones went to Laban and the sturdy to Jacob. Now, what really happens here when you look at it is that Laban, he makes a deal with Laban based on what the animals, the colors of what the animals look like. But Jacob did something really, again, very basic. He didn't look at the colors of the animals. He looked at whether they were stronger or weaker. And he knew that stronger or weaker animals, that's all you really care about. You don't care about what they look like, because if you give them time, they will have the speckled. The speckled animals are bound to come out. Even though, again, those aren't the ones that you necessarily would want to have. He doesn't care because he knows he's going to get more of them, and he can get the stronger animals too. What he does is he genetically selects those animals that are going to be the sturdier, hardier, more likely to breed animals. And that's what he does. So he plays a trick on Laban. Well, he doesn't really play a trick on him. He just uses knowledge. And again, there's no magic necessary here. This is literally knowing genetics and knowing that what you really are looking for are not what, again, if you decided, I only want to keep the children that have brown hair, but everybody seems to have blonde hair. Well, guess what? Some of the kids are going to have brown hair. And what you really are looking for is which kids are more likely going to breed. And that's what he essentially does with these animals. And it says, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks, maidservants, men servants, camels, and asses. Now he heard the things that Laban's sons were saying. Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from that which our fathers, he has built up all his wealth. And Jacob also saw that Laban's manner toward him was not as it had been in the past. And then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers where you were born, and I will be with you. So things are not going well in Jacob's house. The family is turning on him. They're jealous of him. It's not looking good. But what Jacob also hears is the word of God. Go back home. go back to the place where your fathers came from, and I will be with you. And so Jacob does finally make the move. Jacob had Rachel and Leah called to the field where his flock was and said to them, I see that your father's manner toward me is not as it has been in the past, but the God of my father has been with me. As you know, I have served your father with all my might, but your father has cheated me, changing my wages time and again. God, however, would not let him do me harm. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, and all the flocks would drop speckled young. And if he thus said, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flock would drop streaked young. God is taking your father's livestock and giving it to me. Now notice that Jacob calls them out into the field. They're not going to talk about it in the tents because people will hear. They'll be prying eyes and ears. They'll be hearing what he's doing right now, which is that we got to get out of here. And he's going to have to do it surreptitiously. Once at the mating of the flocks, I had a dream in which I saw the he-goats mating with the flocks were streaked, speckled, and mottled. And in the dream, an angel of God said to me, Jacob. Here, I answered, Hineni. And again, this is Jacob telling this to his wives. He's not this. We haven't heard this before, that it was an angel who said this. And he said, note well that all the he-goats that were mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, and mottled. For I have noted that all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise and leave this land and return to your native land. So when Jacob tells his wives, he says, it's God, it's an angel that came and said it to me. And specifically, he says, which we didn't read before, you saw it, that the angel says, I'm the God at Bethel, where you made that promise. So I know it. I know who you are. You know who I am. I know what you said. And now he says to them, this was an angel that appeared to him and that he's got to do it. And Rachel and Leah answered him saying, have we still a share in the inheritance of our father's house? It's rhetorical. Surely he regards us as outsiders, now that he has sold us and used us up our purchase price. Wow. They're basically saying, we have no value to him anymore. We have no value. Truly, all the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, do just as God told you. Now, notice what they say. They don't say it's yours. Our father's stuff is now ours and our children. Now, you can say your children too, but they don't. They say it's ours now. So it's very interesting that the daughters, the wives, his wives, the mother of his children say, it's ours now. We don't have an issue with it. And thereupon Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove off all his livestock and all the wealth that he had amassed, the livestock in his possession that he acquired in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. So he gets out of town. Meanwhile, Laban had gone to shear his sheep. Now, what's so interesting about this is that this is all done surreptitiously. This is all done where Laban is not around when they get out of town. And it says that Rachel stole her father's household idols. And again, this is the last part of what we're reading right now. She stole them. Again, another story of trickery, another story of deceit. Why did she steal the idols? The Trophim, these are Trophim, these are household idols. Why did she steal them? Well, some sources say it's because she doesn't want her father to worship idols. I don't buy that. Did she think that she was taking them and therefore she took the good luck with them? Possible, which means that Rachel, even though she's our ancestor, even though she's our holy mother, maybe was hedging her bets a little bit. These are the gods of the house. Let's take them. The other possibility is whether or not they work, her father thinks they work, let's take them. So those are all possibilities. I guess there's other possibilities too. But the possibility that she wants to harm her father or do it out of spite is a possibility. The possibility that she wants to help her father because she wants to rescue him of his idolatry, also a possibility, probably the least likely. And the other possibility, the very real possibility, is she thinks they work. She thinks they work. And so she takes them. This is critical for the way this story is about to end. Jacob kept Laban the Aramean in the dark. Doesn't tell him that he was fleeing. And he fled with all that he had. Soon he was across the Euphrates and heading toward the hill country of Gilad. So he's making his way towards Canaan. He's already gotten past one river, the Euphrates, and now is heading towards Gilad. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. So he took his kinsman with him and pursued him a distance of 7 days, catching him up with him in the hill country of Gilad. And again, this is the outer boundary of northern Israel. This will be part of Israel. This is in the Golan Heights. God appeared to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream by night and said to him, beware of attempting anything with Jacob, good or bad. By the way, what's wrong with good? But that's what it says. Don't do anything. Don't do anything with Jacob, good or bad. That's what it says. Mitov ad ra. Don't do anything. Laban overtook Jacob. So did he listen to him? What's he going to do when he gets him? God already spoke to him. Laban overtook Jacob. Jacob had pitched his tent on the height. And Laban with his kinsmen encamped in the hill country of Gilad. And Laban said to Jacob, what did you mean by keeping me in the dark and carrying off my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee in secrecy and mislead me and not tell me? I would have sent you off with festive music, with timbrel and lyre. Now, I think he's a liar. I think, no, it's the other liar, right? It's the liar. He's lying right now. He's saying, I would have sent you off with a big celebration. And then he says, you did not even let me kiss my sons and daughters goodbye. It was a foolish thing for you to do. Now, again, he's talking about his grandsons. He calls them my sons. They're my sons. I have it in the power to do you harm. But the God of your father, by the way, he doesn't say God. He says the God of your father said to me last night, beware of attempting anything with Jacob, good or bad. So he confesses. He says, your God told me. He's got some value to that, right? Very well. You've had to leave because you were longing for your father's house. I get it. But now, why did you steal my gods? That's a good question. Now, of course, Jacob doesn't know. Jacob answered Laban saying, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. So he tells him why I went off. Because I didn't think you would let them go. Okay. But anyone with whom you find your gods shall not remain alive. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have of yours and take it. Jacob, of course, did not know that Rachel had stolen. So if there's any question whether he knew, the Torah says he didn't know. Now, the problem here, of course, is he just put his wife Rachel under a death penalty. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and the tents of the two maidservants, but he did not find them. Leaving Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Rachel, meanwhile, had taken the idols and placed them in the camel cushion and sat on them. So she put them under her saddle. Laban rummaged through the tent without finding them. So Laban's really upset about this. His gods are gone. And she said to her father, let not my Lord take it amiss that I cannot arise before you, for the period of women is upon me. Thus he searched, but he could not find the household. So where did she hide? She hid them underneath her and claimed that she was menstruating, which is why she couldn't get up. Which, by the way, a little disrespectful for the gods, which would be okay because they're idols. And so she can do whatever she wants with the idols. In Judaism, these were not things she should have. But she put them underneath her. Now Jacob became incensed and took up his grievance with Laban. Jacob spoke to Laban and said, "What is my crime? What is my guilt that you should pursue me?" Now again, there's a legitimate issue here, which is that these idols were stolen. Stolen. You rummaged through all my things. What have you found of all your household objects? Set it here before me and my kinsmen, and let them decide between us two. These 20 years I have spent in your service. So 14 years for the 2 wives, and then assumedly 6 years for the rest of this livestock that he has. 20 years I've been in your service. Your ewes and your she-goats, they never miscarried, nor did I feast on rams for your flock. Everything's been good while I've been here. That which was torn by beasts, I never brought to you. I myself made good on that loss. So any losses, I took them on. You can imagine a father-in-law, the son-in-law and the father-in-law talking about business, and the son-in-law saying, "I ran your business for years, and I never held you for the losses. I took the losses. If a client, didn't pay, I never even put it towards you. I took the loss." You can imagine a son-in-law saying this to his father-in-law for years, over the centuries. Whether snatched by day or by night. Often scorching heat ravaged me by day and frost by night, and sleep fled from my eyes. Of the 20 years that I spent in your household, I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages time and again. So you're hearing it all right now. This is all the grievances. This is 20 years of pent up, the way you treated me, right? You treated me like garbage. Had not the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac, right? Pachad Yitzhak, we heard this phrase before, been with me, you would have sent me away empty-handed. But God took notice of my plight and the toil of my hands, and he gave judgment last night. So when God talked to you and told you, that's God backing me up. That's what he tells him. Otherwise, I get nothing. And Laban spoke up and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters. The children are my children. And the flocks are my flocks. All that you see is mine. Yet what can I do now about my daughters or the children they have borne? Come, let us make a pact, you and I, that there may be a witness between you and me." So Laban doesn't give up his ownership of these things, his family, his flocks. He doesn't say they're yours. He says they're mine. But I'm giving you permission to go. Thereupon Jacob took up a stone and set up a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." So they took stones and made a mound. And they partook of a meal there by the mound. Laban named it Yagar Sahuduta, but Jacob called it Gal Ed. They both had a name for this place, this boundary line, this border. This is the story, just as the story began with the establishment of Bethel as a pillar, as a sacred shrine. Here we have the story of a border. Laban declared, "This mound is a witness between you and me this day." That is why it was named Gal Ed, that this is a witness, a mound of a witness. And it was called Mitzpah, another name for this place. This is the place it was known by, because he said, "May the Lord watch between me and you," right? You and me. When we are out of sight of each other, if you ill-treat my daughters or take other wives besides my daughters, though no one else be about, remember God himself will be witness between you and me. Your God, the God that he says is your God, God will witness. And Laban said to Jacob, "Here is the mound, and here is the pillar which I have set between you and me. This mound shall be a witness, and this pillar shall be a witness, that I am not to cross to you past this mound, and that you are not to cross to me past this mound and this pillar with hostile intent." This is the boundary between Israel and Syria. And one can make the argument, It's still the boundary between Israel and Syria right now. Don't cross this boundary with hostile intent. I won't cross this boundary of hostile intent. This is why this is a border between Israel and Syria, because Laban and Jacob made it that way. And this is an answer for, again, how do these places have their historic meaning? Because people made vows in these places. These pillars, these mounds were sacred places. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, and here he invokes his God of his father, their ancestral deities, judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Yitzchak. And Jacob then offered up a sacrifice on this height and invited his kinsmen to partake of the meal. After the meal, they spent the night on that height. And this is the explanation for why this place exists. We're going to finish up with just these last lines. Early in the morning, Laban kissed his sons and his daughters and bade them goodbye. And Laban left on his journey homeward. And Jacob went on his way. The angels of God encountered him. And just as he had an experience with angels when he left, when he returns, when he saw them, Jacob said, "This is God's camp." And he named that place Machanaim, the camp of angels. And so he's back home. And what does he see when he comes back home? He sees angels. Now he knows he's back home. So the story begins and ends with Jacob's journeys. But I want to point out there's a foreshadow, there's a tale in this that we're going to see in this next week's portion, which isn't a happy thing at all. It's a sad thing. Jacob pronounced the death penalty on his own wife, and she indeed dies, giving birth. So as she said that she couldn't get up off the idols because she was in the way of women, it's in the way of women giving birth to Benjamin that she dies. Very powerful, very problematic, and very prophetic ending. And people forget that. They forget the story of the idols, or maybe never heard the story of the idols. And so they miss part of the irony, the tragedy of Rachel's death in childbirth, which is that it was in the way of women that she ended up dying. At the moment that Jacob says whoever is responsible for this will die, she doesn't die at that moment, but she dies in the way of women later on. So this is the foreshadow and the tragedy of what happens to Rachel. And I will tell you, much later on in the Bible, there's another very interesting foreshadow, which is it's Rachel's descendant, King Saul. Saul is a Benjaminite, which means he's from the tribe of Rachel, who is deceived with an idol. When he's trying to kill David, his daughter, King David's wife, Michal, she takes a teroff, she takes an idol and places it in the bed and tells him that it's her husband, and they bring it down and it's an idol. They find it as an idol in the bed. They use that trick, like the escaping from prison trick, where they put some kind of dummy, some kind of creation, like a full body mannequin in the bed. And sure enough, it's an idol that Rachel's descendant is used to be tricked by his daughter Michal. So it's an interesting also foreshadowing there too. So the Torah is filled with these. And again, the word teroff is not a common word for idol. It's used in both of those scenes. It's not the only place that the word teraphim are used, but it is used in those two scenes. The scene of Rachel stealing her father's teraphim, and then again when Michal uses an idol to trick her father, King Saul, with this idol. So that is the Vayetze, the story of the journeys of the journey and the return of Jacob. And next week we get to read about his reunification with Esau and his wrestling with angels. All right, everybody. Sorry for the technical glitch tonight. And I love this portion because it's filled with love, tragedy, deception, children. It's really filled with life. And it is, again, hopefully not the kind of excitement. No one should have that kind of excitement, too much excitement. But we just covered 20 years of Jacob's life. And as you can see, it was a life filled with highs and lows and lots of drama. But there obviously were some good moments too. He's had 11 sons and 1 daughter. He's had 12 kids already. And he's learned a lot over the last 20 years. He made a deal with God. God brought him back. But it's been an interesting journey. And I don't need to tell you, each one of us are on an interesting journey. Not always the way we think it is going to go. And we make deals with God and they don't always turn out the way we think they will. But maybe at some point we're grateful for what we do have. And I think about that. Definitely will hopefully be thinking about that tomorrow. In the midst of everything else that we're dealing with right now, there's so much we should be grateful for. So hopefully everyone will have a chance to be grateful, and I'm grateful to all of you. So thank you everybody for being with us tonight, and please stay safe and positive and uplifted. And again, lots of blessings for Thanksgiving. Thinking about that tomorrow. Take care. Deal with it right now. There's so much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good
Night. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Grateful, and I'm
Happy
grateful.
Thanksgiving. Love you, Joyce.
Thank you.
Filled with blessings, everybody, and be well. Be well. Positive and